I was thinking about one of the main things that Ayn Rand talks about. I'll just read a little quote here. I'll jump right into the sentence. She talks about when it comes to romantic art, of course she uses the art term. The emotional experience of admiration for man's highest potential, the experience of looking up to a hero, a view of life motivated and dominated by values, a life in which man's choices are practicable, effective, and crucially important. That is a moral sense of life. I think that's, there are several quotes you could read about the essence of her ideas, but this point that there has to be a sense of life, that there has to be values, that there has to be choices made, I think is paramount. And she opposes that to the whole idea of naturalism, where you just depict. And I think, I think that's
why she says that photography cannot be art, for example.
Mm.
Yeah, but that's a very silly point. I want to come back to that. I can't disagree anymore.
We'll come back to it now.
Okay, well, she goes on on the same page. She goes on to talk about film, and she says, "Well, film can be because film can tell a story."
Mm-hmm.
So she just completely neglected the fact that a photo can also tell a story.
Mm.
Her main argument is that you're not being creative, like you're not actually making something with the photo.
Well, you can with a photograph. You can arrange.
You're arranging
the
the
scene
whole.
and everything.
Exactly.
Well, there is with Ayn Rand some instances where you can pull out some things that she says like that. She talks about what did she talk about? How I forget the exact place where she talks about something about glue. And you don't use glue when you make art, so if it's glue in there, it cannot be art. And I was thinking, well, what you would do with the canvas before you prepare it? You put rabbit skin glue on it. So there's sometimes, of course, where she's very specific, and you could. It's
always dangerous to be specific.
Yeah, you can always sort of highlight that and say, oh, Ayn Rand doesn't know what she's talking about. But I mean, she hasn't made a fully scale aesthetics or a program.
Well, but I mean, there's a reason why we can sit here and discuss her aesthetic philosophy, because she is very clear about what she values.
Yeah.
So it's not like other vague philosophers like Plato. And there are actually very few aesthetic philosophers that have a clear philosophy. And there are very few aesthetic philosophers at all, but it's like I think it's Aristotle and Plato and what's his name? This medieval philosopher.
You're not thinking about Aquinas.
Yes, Thomas Aquinas. He had an aesthetic philosophy, and there are some others, I guess. And then it's Ayn Rand. It's not that many.
No. Yeah, it's that, or you go to screenwriting to learn how to tell a story.
Yeah.
But but I think this whole idea of she defines Romanticism as depicting people that have volition, that have values, and act accordingly.
Yeah, and you should explain the term volition, because I think it's a bit. You know what it is?
Free will.
Yeah, the power of free will. I think
whether or not you are actually making those choices.
Yeah. Because there's one thing that surprised me a bit. Ayn Rand is very concerned. Well, the quote I read was about the hero, having a hero to look up to. But one of the books that she highlights, that she says this is one of the few, sort of 100% romantic novels, is The Scarlet Letter by Nathaniel Hawthorne.
Okay.
And when you read that, it's just a horrible tragedy of what happens if you live according to altruism. That just totally destroys your whole life.
Well, so she's politically interested in that story, or
no, she's not. She's saying that in that book there is not a single case where, I think I wrote it down. Yeah, she talks about Hawthorne and Victor Hugo. One will never find action for action's sake, unrelated to moral values.
Yeah, and that's another important point. Coming back to the volition. It's the idea that you're constantly making actions. Whether you choose to actually go out and change the world, or whether you just lie in bed, you're still making an action. You're making an active choice. So, or perhaps a passive choice.
But can you say that about naturalism too then?
Yeah. What do you mean?
Well, she says that the problem with naturalism is that there is no volition.
Yeah, but it's also that you don't choose the subject.
Yeah.
That's like the main difference, the main thing that separates naturalism, because they're still using, certain techniques, and they're trying to portray it realistically.
And they have to choose at some.
So what do you choose?
Yeah.
Well, for them, that was the philosophy that you should basically just choose whatever is the most common or ordinary around you.
Or whatever is in front of you.
Yeah.
Yeah, but she phrases it quite in a quite funny way, which talks about your guide or something like that is statistics.
Yeah. It's like rather than something you really want to strive to achieve, it's just something that's statistically probable.
I saw a comedy sketch once where a man was a songwriter, and he wrote about whatever he saw in front of him.
Okay.
And that becomes funny when you talk about music. But with painting, it's suddenly okay.
Yeah, right. No, it's
or with movies. I mean, imagine going to a movie and somebody just writes down all of their observations during a given period of time,
or records.
Yeah, exactly. It would be so boring.
Yeah. Well, that's an art installation.
Yeah,
a little bit.
Yeah,
I guess.
She talks about how purposelessness is contrary to man's nature. So, where you depict something where there's total inaction, that is something that is inhuman, then, in a sort of neutral sense of the term, or just
Well, the things that make humans unique is to make voluntary choices. The fact that you have consciousness, that's what separates you from animals, from the rest of the world.
Yeah.
So therefore, that should also be exemplified in your representation.
But what also makes us different from animals is that we can connect patterns.
Yeah.
We can see patterns that they don't. For example, the analogy with the fox and the hare. The fox runs after the hare. The hare disappears behind the tree and shows up on the other side, and the fox thinks that it's a new hare because it cannot, or rabbit, because it cannot connect the dots. One rabbit disappears behind the tree, and suddenly there's another one on the other side. And human beings are a little bit like that to some extent. I mean, they don't see when history is repeated.
Yeah.
And I would say that Ayn Rand is, when it comes to architecture, she has some problems in that area. That she doesn't connect it.
Well, that's what I talked about with Vegard Martinsen when we had that conversation on the Romantic Manifesto. It's conversation number 9 or something like that. That is so strange that when it comes to architecture, she sort of perfectly illustrates Kant's ideas, and also the Hegelian ideas of having to reflect your time and not, having to be modern, not having to do, that it's prohibited to do something that has been done before because it's old-fashioned.
Yeah.
And I think it's very interesting to look at what was her favorite poets in every discipline, and in music it was Rachmaninoff. So that's a quite good choice in terms of kitsch.
Let's talk about painting.
And then
let's rip into her and paint.
And then she has Victor Hugo as her favorite in fiction writing, and that's also a great choice. But then she says about architecture that architecture should not imitate nature, and it's interesting that she even writes it to make a point out of it.
Yeah, but there are.
I think I have the quote here somewhere. She says, from the Romantic Manifesto, architecture is in a class by itself because it combines art with a utilitarian purpose and does not recreate reality but creates a structure for man's habitation or use expressing man's values. Yeah. And it's a bit strange, I mean, to say that it expresses man's values, but it's not a recreation of reality.
Yeah, but
isn't that a bit of a contradiction?
Here's the thing. If you get down to like the very core of her philosophy, then you'll find that she was contradicting herself in this instance. For example, in every other field, like in sculpture, she talks about all of the sensory elements that are involved. You have sight, but you also have touch. And she considers the fact that it's three-dimensional. So the architecture should be considered in the same way. Yeah, it serves a purpose of habitation, but that doesn't mean you should ignore the visual aspects.
And that was so strange also that I couldn't understand what Vegard Martinsen said when we talked about architecture. This thing about if you're in a great cathedral, you feel small. But when you're in an office building where it's 3 yards perhaps under the ceiling, then you feel like you're big because you're big according to the room. And that's kind of sort of this logical statements that sound very strange.
And it's quite obvious that she is not looking at the church as architecture, she's looking at it as a religious institution.
So from an ideological point of view.
So it doesn't become, she should look at it as if it's a building for whatever.
Yeah, but she also looks at the architecture that she praises, the modernist architecture that she praises, in the same sort of religious way, right? Yeah, in the ideological, because of our, sorry. She's not praising it for the actual visual appeal or anything like that. It's not an aesthetical appeal. It's an ideological appeal.
It's an idea, yeah. And I'm quite sure, I have this theory that Ayn Rand connected her view of architecture to not to her reason but to her emotions, because she came from the beautiful St. Petersburg in Europe, where communism was taking over, and then she came to the United States, the home of the brave, the land of the free, and she saw these skyscrapers. I think she came to New York in 1926. It was the same year when the first Art Deco skyscraper was built. And she connected the modernistic architecture with freedom. Yeah. And that's her big mistake, I think. Well,
there's a thing that you can say that it's what does it say? It's a philosophy of literature. So that's sort of a disclaimer in that. But I mean, there are instances where she doesn't know enough about what she talks about, but speaks from sort of a purely logical viewpoint, and then the consequences become absurd. Like when she talks about sculpture, she says that sculpture imitates reality, not as it is known to man, because it does so without using color. And then you go back to what we know in writing, at least from the Greek, about the Greek sculptures. There's descriptions of how this sculptor made I forget which woman it was supposed to be, Medea, I think, and she's dying, and how he used a specific type of metal in her face so that it would be paler, and you can sort of see the blood collecting at the bottom of her body. It's like she's in the act of actually dying. So they would use all kinds of...
And she's not taking into account that they were painted.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, whether they were or not.
And with stones for the eyes and all kinds of stuff.
And you could paint it anyways. Just because it's a sculpture doesn't mean you can't paint it. So
And also something I thought about she writes about this eyesore. Mouth sore.
I know.
Mouth sore in that painting, and it seems like Ayn Rand is more concerned with that you should depict human beings as more beautiful than they are. She borrows that from Aristotle's Poetics, but not that you should necessarily tell an interesting story. It's more about the beautiful depiction, the heroic depiction of man. But not necessarily, with Quasimodo, you talked about with Vegard Martinsen about that. And she criticizes Rembrandt for depicting people as worse than they are.
Yeah, but also the flayed ox.
Yeah, that's
something about his genius shouldn't lower itself to depicting something like that.
Yeah.
And that's when you...
Did she say that?
Yeah.
His genius?
Or something to that effect. I don't remember the exact quote. But the point is that he shouldn't sort of make his hands dirty by painting something like that. And I was just thinking about... and also she says that you cannot create something that is I'm paraphrasing, create something that is emotionally gripping if you depict well, she talks about sculpture. If you depict inanimate objects or animals.
Yeah, right.
And I'm just thinking about that. If you just sort of extrapolate the consequences of that, well, what about Headley Castle by John Constable, or the old pine trees by Hartwig, or your father's, the dead hare? That would be something that is so low. You don't want to associate yourself with a dead hair, so why paint it? Because that becomes so specific that it starts sounding like this North Korean operas where there are, they have the bad American soldier and then you have the innocent North Korean flower girl. It's a bit easy to ridicule.
And since we're speaking about painting, I think it's interesting to look at what Ayn Rand's favorite paintings were.
Yeah.
And I have this. This was her. No, actually, I can show the other one first. That's more interesting. This, according to a book by Jeff Britting on Ayn Rand, this was her favorite painting. It's called. It's a painting by Salvador Dali.
But
and it looks like some kind of cubism. And Jesus on the cross.
Surrealism, yeah.
She said. You can look at it if you want. She said about it that corpus hyper cubus, it's called. It says that she spent hours contemplating it at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. She even felt a kinship between her personal view of John Galt's defiance over his torture in Atlas Shrugged and Dali's depiction of the suffering of Jesus.
Yeah. Well, then you get into her lack of understanding of painting technique.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess that's what you were alluding to. I mean,
yeah, but I have something else to say first, and that is that she does protect herself a little bit. She says that you can have something that you like, or it can even be your favorite, but that is not to say that that's part of, the aesthetical judgment. Because this is like for judging, and she said that it's basically important to recognize whether that's just something you like or whether it's actually good based on objective criteria.
Right, okay, yeah, that's fair.
So, anyways.
Yeah, she says that. What does she say about art? That it's that is your metaphysical value judgments.
Yeah, it's that's the thing.
Art is a recreation of reality based on your metaphysical value judgments.
Yeah.
But if you put that into simple terms, I mean, it's like she wants you to be able to identify with the painting, and it should be taking your concepts and putting it into something very immediate. You should be able to understand it immediately.
So that's a very kitsch.
If you really get down to it and you look at the actual philosophy rather than the terrible examples, then there's actually a lot of good substance.
Oh
there.
yeah.
Well, but still, I think it's interesting to look at what she regarded as the best.
Well, you have Vermeer also. That's
Vermeer,
who she says is the best painter.
That might be true, but her favorite was this one. José Manuel Cappelletti. He was a student of Salvador Dali.
Yeah.
And what I find interesting in all her, she collected a lot of his work, and I find it interesting that all her favorite paintings are of faces that are turned away from us.
And when there's no story.
And there's no drama. It's a figure placed. But it's a bit misplaced in a landscape.
But she's very alone. That's probably this whole thing about how you feel, or in this one there's a man in the distance. Here she's just together with this little rodent. Let's see, there's a man in the distance here.
Yeah.
Maybe this is the man she's hoping for.
But that's a strange thing, and that there's a lack of consistency in the sense that when she talks about, I mean, one of the things that she defines incredibly exact is that the difference between Romanticism, as she says it, and naturalism is that you have plot or no plot. Yeah. Plot or not, that's romanticism or naturalism, where there's nothing happening, it's just pure naturalism.
Yeah,
but then she chooses something that is where there's no plot.
It's interesting to compare this to her love for Victor Hugo, because I don't see the connection.
Exactly. Yeah. In Hugo is bam, 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 and it's so visual. And it's action all over. Or
she wrote about this painter that. His style projects the luminous clarity of a rational psycho-epistemology, that she wrote that about Salvador Dali.
Yeah.
Rational psycho-epistemology, while most, though not all, of his subjects project an irrational and revoltingly evil metaphysics.
Yeah.
And but she about Capuletti, she said he was a man who was in love with life, with this earth. And that ties a little bit back to the sense of life.
That's what I was thinking about for both of these, because she stresses the importance that you have objective criteria, and then you also have your own personal sort of sense of life, and that's something that can also become important.
So she says that the sense of life is personal?
Yeah. So those are different. So you have, objective criteria, which you should be able to judge without any sort of personal affliction, and you're not going to basically involve your emotions in a way.
Well, she talks about how your sense of life is sort of your unconscious values. That you
it's your understanding of the world.
Basically. Yeah. You see
your metaphysical value judgment.
Yeah. You see a landscape, and you just immediately feel, I'd love to be there in this, for the sake of the situation that is described, or the emotion that is described, right? And it's not a specific reason for it, but it gives you that, how you view life, how you would like life to be. That is something that is concretized in that image, and that gives you that sort of. That goal that you can sort of keep in mind.
And I totally understand that you have to separate between what is the best and what is your favorites or your guilty pleasure.
Yeah, you have memories from childhood and whatever.
Yeah. And sometimes we've talked about that sometimes here on the farm, that sometimes what is the best, it is not necessarily that which you want to watch the most. For example, if it's a movie, you can still recognize that it's the best, but you have some guilty pleasures. And that's
Also makes me think about what your brother said, that the good story is signified by the fact that you wish it was a bad story.
That's something different, but
but just to remind me of it, like you would wish that these two would find each other and find love and have a family and everything would be fine, but then they are separated and you're just sad by that. But
it's a little bit the same with novels. I can read a book, and it's really I get really excited. I read through the whole book in a very short time, because it's such an exciting story. But then another book might be very, very difficult to read, and it takes a lot of time. But I remember that one. That one sticks to my mind, not the one that I could just flush through.
If you want to see the entire segment, head over to caveofapollos.com/subscribe and become a $5 patron today. Watch all our conversations or shuffle through the Cave of Apollos audio playlist by becoming a member today at caveofapollos.com/subscribe.